Alarms screamed in 6 languages, but Captain Mina Park only heard the drum line of her own pulse. USV Fremont yawed hard to port, plasma wake flaring blue-white against the night of Barnard's Reach. A spindle of hostile shards knifed past their bow, faceted metallic snowflakes, each singing a different note that wormed through hull metal and bone. The shard choir had found the convoy. "Task Force Ember, go glitter," Park said, her voice kept to the calm side of clipped. "Launch Bucket 1. On the tack plot, civilian tugboats, volunteer River Queen Old Salt peeled out from the convoy of scows and hab barges. They were slow, stubborn brick piles, piloted by retirees and Union kids who'd swapped river channels for the void. Their cargo, 200 drums of salvaged foil, shaved wire, and overcharged relay coils that engineers had cursed into something dangerous. The drums tumbled into space and burst like dandelions. Glitter. Every flake carried a cheap oscillator tuned to the choir's harmonics. The vacuum blizzard confused the enemy lattice lances the way a mirror maze confuses a drunk. "Glitter field spooling," reported Ortega, her tactical officer. "They are biting." On the screen, a lattice lance struck the cloud and split into 100 wrong answers. Choir drones veered, recalculating, their perfect formations suddenly human bad, messy, improvisational, vulnerable. Park lifted a brow. Humanity had made a religion of improvisation long before they made a fleet. "Signal in the clear," she added. "All ships, Candleline protocol, nobody gets left." Broadcasting in the clear was madness when a predator listened. Her comms chief, Aisha Reynolds, shot her a worried glance that said so. Park answered with the flicker of a smile. "Let them hear our decision," she murmured. "Ethics work better when they are performed." Out past the glitter storm, the convoy's tail caught up. School buses welded to ore scows, agropods hitched 2x2, a temple in a shipping container, everything that could carry life stacked like hope on hope. The exodus didn't look like a fleet, it looked like a potluck. "Choir centroid rising," Ortega said. "We'll have a cathedral in 2 minutes." Cathedral-class vessels were the conductors of the choir, vast, prismed ships that made their drones sing. Fremont wasn't supposed to duel a cathedral. Task Force Ember was a picket saved for the ugly jobs. Hold a door, shield a retreat, make trouble, and survive it. Park's grandmother had told her about the Korean War's Chosin Reservoir, a fighting withdrawal that looked like a miracle in snow. It was easier to be brave when you were the bridge for someone else to cross. "Old Salt is drifting," Reynolds said. "She took a scrape and lost a tug rotor. Captain Nguyen requests permission to fall behind and prime her second glitter bay." Park's jaw tightened. Fall behind meant die behind. "Neg." She swallowed, then toggled the civilian channel. "Old Salt, I'm stealing your idea. We'll prime it from here. Booker Washington, sling Salt with Tractor 3 and drag her along. Yorktown, backstop with PD." A beat of silence, then Nguyen's voice, smoky with age and salt water. "Aye, Captain, steal it loud." Fremont's point defense spears lit the void like meteors in reverse, cutting chaff from the air to clear a lane for the convoy while drones pinged off their bow like hail. The ship trembled as a resonance note found its way into a strut. Engineers shouted on loop about harmonic dampers. Park adjusted the ship's rotation by 18 degrees, the angle Ortega's back of the envelope had predicted would turn the choir's note into their own static. The tremble eased. History today, glitter and luck and Union tugboats, Park thought and almost laughed. "Cathedral contact?" Ortega snapped. The thing rose from the dark like an ice mountain lit from within, arch and rib, horn and plate. A cord rolled across the fleet that set teeth buzzing. The glitter cloud shredded under a rake of hard light. Park watched the arc of the convoy and knew their math wasn't going to hold. A cathedral could hurt, and it intended to. It drew a wide net to corral the refugees toward a closed gate and a dead end. "Ma'am," Reynolds said softly, "we're going to need a bigger trick." "Then we'll make a bigger one," Park said, and lifted her hand to order Fremont into the choir's throat when a squall of desperate clicks interrupted her. Alien syllables, a distress call, Ortega translated before the AI finished. Cathari corvette Virinti pinned in the glitter field. They stayed to help the barges. An ally bleeding inside the storm she'd made. Park exhaled through her teeth. Task force, she said, we're revising our sins. New priority, save the corvette. Then we cut the net. She pointed Fremont's nose into the blizzard and lit the mains as the cathedral turned to greet them. The glitter blizzard whirled back across Fremont's bow, a man-made aurora mixed with nails. The ship's skin sensors read 1,000 tiny screams where micromesh scraped along carbon foam. Ortega ran a string of firing solutions like a card sharp with too few cards. Reynolds layered the human band's comms with Cathari clicks and trills, hauling meaning across species like a bridge over a riptide. Virinti, keep your nose toward the choir's centroid, Park said. We're punching an alley. The Cathari corvette wobbled like a fish hooked in two directions, her carapace plates scorched. A beam from the cathedral's choir leaders cut across her stern and peeled armor like citrus. Park felt the old cold in her spine she got looking down from cliffs, not fear precisely, an accounting, how many shells left, how many lives, how many debts to history. We have 6 Vespers, Ortega said, meaning their expensive anti-lattice missiles. Admiral says keep 2 for the gate run. Admiral doesn't see what I see, Park answered. 2 on the cathedral's right choir leader, staggered. The missiles lifted on blue plumes, curved obediently, then jittered as the choir sang a counter. The first Vesper missed by a stingray's width, fooled by an echo. The second learned from the first, corrected, and slammed home. Light bled, the choir's right hand arch dimmed. Virinti surged an inch. Reynolds looked up from her board. Virinti transmits gratitude and an apology for stepping into our hazard. They request we save the children barge Becky E. She got spun. On the main display, a boxy shape tumbled toward the cathedral's net. Someone had welded a mural to her side, a stick figure family holding hands under a yellow sun. Park's mouth went dry. We can't catch both the corvette and the barge with current vector, Ortega warned. Midway, Park thought. The way Enterprise ran planes with the deck still on fire. Dunkirk, little ships weaving through steel. The lesson wasn't just courage, it was logistics married to conscience. Yorktown, you are now barge rescue. Drag Becky E. into our shadow. Booker, Washington, carve me a path with point defense low power. Don't vaporize our own glitter. Booker's guns whipped until the glitter thinned to confetti. Yorktown's tractor breams latched onto the tumbling barge and slowed it like a hand catching a thrown glass. Virinti coughed and fell into Fremont's wake, her alien captain Rel sending a sharp, relieved click that translated as a word with 20 meanings, one of which was kin. Cathedral's adapting, Ortega said. The choir's net reconfigured, threads shining as they nodded into a new plan. Drones dove not at ships, but at the human glitter tech itself, their lances tuned to fry the oscillators that made the blizzard sing. Smart, mean, efficient. Time to ash, Park said. Ortega didn't argue. The ashen net was a garage invention turned doctrine last month, chaff seeded with reactive dust that under a low-energy beam puffed into a cloud of superheated ions. It didn't kill. It made the void into a sauna, and the choir's precisely tuned crystals hated that like a violin hates humidity. Warning, Reynolds added. The ash'll jack our radiators. We'll cook if we sit in it. Then we don't sit. Park felt the deck shudder as vents opened. On my mark, 1, 2, now. A white fog blossomed in the black. The lattice lances shivered where they crossed it and came out dull. Drones flinched. Virinti slipped free and crawled toward Yorktown's flank. Fremont's skin temperature rose 18 degrees in a heartbeat. Engineers cursed creatively and begged for a course change. Bring us through the throat, Park said, keeping her voice steady for them to hear. Short burn, then roll to shed heat on the dark side. They knifed the fog. Somewhere in the soup, the Becky E's crew whooped over an open mic, Americans who sounded like home. Park thought of lessons that don't make holovids, how turning away at the right moment preserves more than pride. Virtue ethics said character is habit, war taught that habit must be trained. We choose kindness in extraction drills so we don't forget it when metal sings. New contacts, Ortega snapped. Back gate just flickered. Something's opening behind us. Park swore. A second cut point, subtle and mean, yawning like a mouth behind the convoy, the cathedral was herding them into an ambush inside an ambush. A smaller choir detachment bled through, skippers with surgical lances aimed at the barge's soft underbellies. Ember split, Park ordered. Fremont and Virinti pivot to the rear. Yorktown and Washington keep the front net ragged. Tugs hold formation. I know your instincts, don't break the school. Reynolds' fingers danced. Captain Rel of Virinti requests permission to bind our fields. They can amplify our ash trick with their shell resonance, something they call drumskin. Do it, Park said, and in the turn her displays showed her something else. 3 bright neutrino needles far off axis, watching, observers, jurisdiction-obsessed preterate ships that wrote tickets at wars. Preterate? Ortega breathed. Park set her jaw. Of course they come now. And the cathedral's note deepened as it opened its maw. Preterate observers arrived like court stenographers in a bar fight. 3 needle ships holding position, lights cold and bureaucratic. Reynolds patched in their proclamation, a sterile voice tucked inside layers of legalese. Employment of resonance inversion in a civilian zone violates Covenant Annex 7. Parties will desist. Resonance inversion? Ortega frowned. Rel clicked on the line, Cathari notes like pebbles and rain. Translation: if we sing back at the choir the way they sing, the preterate will judge. They fear shattering crystal fragments into untracked hazards. Park rubbed her brow. They fear someone inventing a better gun than theirs. Rel's tone shifted, amused even through injury. Also true. We need a different hymn, Reynolds said almost to herself. She brought up a visual, waveforms stacked like cordwood, human and Cathari tones layered with the choir's pure harmonics. What if we detune, not mirror, muddy? Jazz the void, Ortega murmured. Make the band swing off the beat. We'll use low-power gravitic ripple, Park said, catching the idea as it sparked. She pointed to the convoy map. We install emitters on the tugs and habs, tie them to our hulls, and play something that's not a weapon by Annex 7 definition, something human, something imperfect that's hard to predict. Like what? Reynolds asked. Park thought of church basements and barbecue smoke, of Oakland Street corners with boys beatboxing against the aches of the week. Gospel and blues progressions, layered with Cathari drumskin, make the choir's coherence stumble, not shatter. Reynolds grinned. Navajo code talkers used a language to carry strategy no enemy could parse. We'll use music to carry physics. They worked fast because fast was all they had. Engineers lashed emitters to tugboat hulls with mag clamps and cursing. Cathari techs clattered along Yorktown's spine, tapping carapaces to test echo. Ortega sketched firing arcs across a tumbling rubble pile, Asteroid 9 Alpha, nicknamed Anvil, big enough to hide a dozen ships if no one sneezed. Set the trap, Park ordered. We'll draw the rear detachment toward Anvil, make them chase the convoy tail. Washington and Yorktown will make noise at the front to keep the cathedral's attention. When the detachment comes in, we swing the band. She caught herself at the viewport for a heartbeat. The barges didn't look like soldiers, even with emitters bolted on. They looked like a neighborhood's worth of last chances. Stoicism reminded her to separate what she could control, choices, tone, priorities, from what she couldn't, the choir's hunger, the preterate's clipboard. Good counsel, even if she was bad at serenity. Preterate message again, Reynolds said. Annex 7 clarifying guidance. The employment of artistic emissions with intent to impair is a gray area. Enforcement discretion will be exercised. Translation. Ortega said dryly, they want plausible deniability if it works. Excellent, Park said. We'll achieve the impossible quietly. The convoy threaded Anvil's shadow, tugboats puffing microburns to stay tight. Fremont and Virinti eased into the ambusher's chair on the far side. The rear choir detachment followed, a dozen sleek shards and a subconductor arch humming with keening patience. On my mark, Park said softly, we swing. Reynolds cued the band. Convoy began to sing. It wasn't pretty in the studio sense. It was beautiful like a cookout. A Cathari drum hum rippled through the fog of ash. Human chords, 12-bar blues stitched to a gospel vamp, rose and fell, complex enough to be unpredictable, honest enough to feel like home. The gravitic emitters massaged the wave just off the choir's perfect pitch. Drones staggered half a meter. The subconductor's beam hiccuped. A lattice lance struck anvil and fizzed across its iron. It sounded to Park like laughter. "Now," she said. Fremont and Virinti popped from shadow like boxers from a clinch. Washington lit the subconductor with a Vesper tuned for less penetration and more shove. The Cathari corvette grappled two drones with hard fields and slammed them into each other like cymbals. The detachment reeled. "Careful on power," Reynolds warned. "Preterate is watching waveform intensity." "Keep it dirty, not deadly," Park said. "We're not trying to kill the song, just make it dance wrong." For a minute that felt like a century. It worked. The ambush fell apart. The barges slipped past, still singing, a shaky band that somehow held the beat. Then the cathedral changed the song. A new note rolled across the void, deeper, a bass that vibrated in teeth roots and helm bolts. The choir wasn't just coherent, it was angry. The cathedral swung its attention toward anvil and breathed a beam that could core continents. "Yorktown's shield just cracked," Ortega said, voice clipped, as if holding Panic's neck. "They can't take a second hit." "Virinti offers to take the next one," Reynolds translated. "They say the Cathari do not owe the Preterate's sense of beauty a single scale." Park tasted iron. The trap had bent the detachment, but now the storm was the front again. A flash notice from the Preterate arrived, cool as ever. "Warning, escalation detected. Cease unregulated inversion or sanctions will follow." "Captain," Ortega said, "if we don't hit the cathedral hard now, we won't have a later." Park looked at the band, at the needles that judged, at the lives piled like furniture in ships that didn't deserve this math. She knew the answer already, hoped for permission she didn't need. "Then we hit," she said, "but we do it our way," and the cathedral opened its mouth wider. "Ortega, prep a non-lethal overdrive," Park ordered, words quick but steady. "Not an inversion, an interruption. We're going to fist bump the cathedral's timing, not break its bones." Rel clicked assent. "We can shape our drumskin to absorb some backlash, but someone must stand inside the echo." "I'll take the echo," Park said automatically. Reynolds's head snapped up. "No, Captain. The ship will," Park amended. She wasn't a martyr, she was a math student. "Fremont's rebound shielding is rated higher than the others. We'll soak, roll, and bleed heat aft." "Washington, you put a shove on the cathedral's left arch exactly when our overdrive empties." "Yorktown, you pull the barges tight into our shadow and try not to get shot to confetti." Preterate advises against unlicensed harmonic experiments, Reynolds recited from a fresh ping, dry as the Mojave. "Civil liabilities may accrue." Park laughed once, harsh and small. "Civilization is a liability we accept gladly." They moved. Engineers cursed. Emitters warmed. Fremont pivoted into the cathedral's face like a small dog daring a bear. The band played again. This time not blues, but a slower call and response lifted from somewhere south of the Mason-Dixon line, a rhythm that taught patience to the hungry. The Cathari drumskin thickened the space around them until the void felt crowded. 3, 2, 1, Ortega counted and hit the overdrive. For a heartbeat, the universe was a rubber band yanked and let go. The choir's perfect lattice quavered as the human Cathari field jabbed its timing half a millisecond off. Not broken, embarrassed. Washington's Vesper shoved the left arch with surgical rudeness. The cathedral flinched. Its beam went wide and chewed a divot from anvil instead of Yorktown's spine. "Hit!" Reynolds shouted. Fremont paid in kind. The echo slammed their hull like a hammer, panels blew, lights strobed, somebody vomited, somebody else prayed. Heat spiked past safety, the cold side rolled into the blast, coolant whined like an angry cat. The tactical display fuzzed as if the ship itself couldn't see straight. Park made herself breathe. "Status," she demanded. "Still here," Ortega said after a swallow. "Yorktown still here, Washington hot but biting, Virinti limping with style. The detachment is scattered, the cathedral is. The cathedral sang a new note, not weapon, warning. It began to vent. Whatever the choir used for coolant was a lattice of exotic ice under pressure. When their field shimmied, it cracked like glass. A thin, bright arc of radiation sprayed across space in a fan that happened to point toward the convoy. Orion-class ugly. Reynolds stared at the screen. "Captain, that plume will rake the barges. We can shelter some, not all." The deck was loud, reports, burns, damage, prayers, curses. Park heard none of it for a second, just the quiet voice that had sat with her since plebe year. Just war means proportionality and discrimination. You aim to spare, but sometimes sparing meant spending something else. Metal, plan, self. "Form the wall," Park said. "All combatants in a crescent, shields wide. We take the plume on our noses." "Captain, we can't," Ortega started. "We can." Park softened her voice a notch. "We voted Candleline when we broadcast in the clear. Nobody gets left." Rel made a sound like river pebbles in rain, respect, grief, exasperated affection. "Kethari will hold the low arc." They said, "We trust your stubbornness." Preterate pinged again, flinty and useless. "Adjust course to minimize civilian harm per Annex 3. "We are adjusting," Park muttered. "We're making ourselves the hazard." Ships moved. Fremont slid left, Washington tucked right, Yorktown muscled into the center like a grandmother shouldering to the front of a church line with a casserole. The Kethari corvette fluttered into the low slot. Barges squeezed behind, band quieting to a hum that still, somehow, held dignity. The plume brightened. "Brace," Park said to everyone and no one. "This is going to hurt." In that blink before impact, she thought of the Navajo code talkers again, how they carried a language through war that refused to be stolen. Of Midway's scouts who saw because they looked where doctrine told them not to. Of 1,000 grocery clerks and teachers and mechanics who became sailors because someone had to hold a line. The radiation front kissed the shields and pushed hard. Fremont's bow glowed. Heat alarms chorused. Paint sublimed, plating screamed. The ship sang a low note that sounded almost human. Park gripped the chair arms and felt the phoenix burn written into their bones. "Hold," she said, and meant it like a prayer. The plume peaked, and then the cathedral, wounded and sputtering, turned, vectoring away, her dignity tattered. The shards withdrew with insect neatness. The fan faded by degrees. "Convoy status?" Park asked, throat raw. Reynolds exhaled like she'd been underwater. "Alive, some sick. Becky E. reports a cracked mural. Captain Nguyen says she'll repaint." Park let out the breath she'd been holding for a war and watched the displays steady. The preterate needle ships hovered, their lights flicking through a legal calculus. "Message incoming from the observers," Reynolds said. Park rolled her shoulders back and prepared for a scolding. "Annex 7 review deferred," Reynolds read, bewildered. "Preterate commends proportional restraint. They request data for doctrinal update. They also send a recipe for a Kethari tea that mitigates radiation sickness." Rel clicked, pleased. Someone's grandmother is on their crew. Park smiled with the kind of tired that lives behind the eyes. "Tell them we'll share music if they share tea." A low chime, long-range gravitic sensors interrupted the moment. Ortega frowned. "Captain, new cut points opening. 3. No, 4. Park turned to the plot and saw the impossible. More choir signatures, a cathedral's twin among them, sliding into the black like sharks arriving to a party late. She stood, spine singing, and found her voice. "Reset the band," she said. "We're not done." They didn't have minutes. They had the thin elastic of nerve that stretches and then snaps. 4 new cut points flared like wounds in the fabric. 2 disgorged shard packs in neat, hungry spirals. 1 birthed a smaller arch, a sub-cathedral tuned for pursuit. The last opened on the long throat toward the system's slipgate, where an arc of derelict survey buoys and half-dead ore relays lined the approach like a string of guttering candles. "Candleline," Reynolds breathed, pulling up a maintenance overlay from a century ago. The buoys had once flashed navigation warnings to ice haulers threading Barnard's Reach. Now they blinked sporadically, uncoordinated, stubborn little hearts. Park felt the idea walk in, fully dressed. "You don't run from the choir, we make a lane they can't sing into." We turn the candle line into a lantern corridor, not inversion, not a weapon, safety beacons. Annex legal if the purpose is navigation, Ortega said, eyes bright despite the bruises under them. We modulate the beacons with our band, sloppy, human, Cathari drumskin on top. Preterate can call it traffic control. Observes concur, came the dry message from a needle ship a breath later. Enforcement discretion applies if emissions are announced as civilian hazard mitigation. Then, almost sheepish, we can contribute repeater drones. Rel clicked approval. Cathari engineers can lace the drumskin around your candles. We call this kind of work harboring. The convoy didn't look like an instrument, but it became one. Tugs took on repeater drones like lantern bearers at a vigil. Yorktown's battered spine hosted a control node. Virinti's crew skittered along Fremont's hull, planting disc-shaped resonators that made the ship feel, to Park's boots, like a drumhead stretched for a festival. The band they'd invented in panic became doctrine as they soldered. The choir didn't idle. The new sub-cathedral swept wide, herding from the far flank while drones probed for a center weak enough to split. The preterate needles kept station, legal lights on, pretending neutrality and offering it like an umbrella in rain. Beacons 1 through 5 can take modulation, Reynolds reported, fingers a blur. 6 is dark, 7 through 12 are noisy but alive. 6 is the keystone, Ortega said, tracing the geometry. Without it, the corridor would bow inward, a cul-de-sac. The choir would net them against the slipgate mouth and carve them apart like fish on a board. Can we revive it? Park asked. Not in a way that won't get us all sided, Reynolds said grimly. It's dead, and the choir knows it. Rel clicked a triad of notes that translated with Cathari precision as despair acknowledged, alternatives demanded, courage assumed. One of us must be Beacon 6, they said softly. Anchor in the throat, sing with the candle line, draw the hunters into our chosen shape. Yorktown's too wounded, Ortega said. Washington's our only heavy shove. Virinti can bind, but not anchor alone. Reynolds didn't look up when she said it. Fremont was built stubborn. Park watched the plot paint her ship into the slot where old Beacon 6 should have been dead center of a coming storm, two cathedrals' attention converging like magnifying glasses on an ant. She felt fear as a clean, bright thing, not the mud that slows you, but the spark that makes you check your knots twice. She toggled the fleet wide. Task Force Ember, we become the candle line. We're going to sing our own lane to the slipgate. Fremont will hold 6. Virinti. Lace us, Washington and Yorktown be the bookends. Tugs, you are lantern bearers now. Preterate observers, you have discretion. Use it generously. A beat. Then Captain Nguyen on Old Salt. I've got my second Glitter Bay primed, Captain. If you need a flare at your back, say the word. Park's throat tightened. Keep it hot, Old Salt. We'll likely need it. She settled into the chair, buckled the strap she'd unlatched an hour ago without noticing, and said, light the candles. The convoy began to hum, and Fremont slid into the dead Beacon's grave, where the choir's shadow thickened. The first notes of the lantern corridor went out like a promise. Beacon 1's ancient bones took the modulation and answered with a wobble. Beacon 2 steadied it. 3 and 4 added a human sway that made the choir's perfect crystals frown. Virinti's drumskin wrapped Fremont's hull until Park could feel Rel's timing in the soles of her boots. The corridor bloomed as a lane of warm wrongness through the cold. Announcing hazard per Annex 3, Reynolds said over tight beam. Voice even. All craft avoid lane if you require perfect coherence. Civilians encouraged to stay within. Yorktown hold the near bookend, Ortega directed. Washington, you're our far shove. If the sub-cathedral noses in, you give them a gentle shoulder check. The choir did not like the hymn. Drones swarmed Beacon 7, testing whether the dirty rhythm hid an edge they could claim as casus belli. Preterate needles pinged warnings in footnotes, their way of threatening a ticket to a missile. The sub-cathedral slithered along the outside, looking for a gap that wasn't there yet but would be as soon as somebody made a mistake. Fremont, your heat's climbing, an engineer warned, voice hoarse. Resonator grid is drawing more than spec. Hold the note, Park said. She imagined a choir practice from childhood, voices slipping off pitch, a snapped pencil, the director's patient clap. We keep time for each other or we don't keep it at all. New distress, Reynolds said, surprising them with the word again. Kethari life pods pinging from beyond our port boundary, 8 souls. They are out of our lane. Rel's carapace plates rippled with a sound that meant shame swallowed, duty remaining. They are ours. Stoicism offered its old counsel, attend to what you can control. Virtue ethics added the next line, build a world where more can be controlled. Park didn't argue her brain, she argued her heart into obedience. Widen the drum skin, lantern bearers increase modulation amplitude by 2% port side, will swell to catch them. That will thin coverage, Ortega warned. We'll open a poacher's trail. Then we will patrol it, Park said. Washington, be ready to body check anything that darts through. Yorktown, swing a half cone to cover Becky E's quarter. The band swelled. The corridor flexed like a rib cage taking a bigger breath. On the edge of the light, 8 Kethari pods slewed in, battered and blinking. Virinti pushed a joy crackle across the net that needed no translation. The choir was not sentimental. The sub-cathedral lunged for the widened seam, and with it came a wave of smaller leaders the analysts would later call madrigals, fast, keen chips good at corrupting rhythms. They spit needles tuned to human heart rates. The band stuttered, then caught again under Reynolds's stubborn hands. Old salt, glitter, flare, Park snapped. Make the seam look like a mirror maze. Stealing it loud, Nguyen said, and her tug's stern plates peeled open. A dandelion puff of foil and wired oscillators blossomed, clever and cheap as America itself when it's broke and kind. The madrigals slewed, lost a beat, regained it. The cost came due on a different ledger. Temple barge is exposed, Ortega said, and the plot circled it. A shipping container welded on a flatbed with a weathered Star of David across, a crescent spray-painted by a kid's careful hand. The sub-cathedral's lance pivoted with lazy inevitability. Yorktown can't move that fast, Reynolds said. We pulled her shield half-wide to hold the bookend. Park saw the choices stack like ammo crates. Let the temple take the hit and keep the lane thick, or shift the lantern to save them and risk the whole. Dunkirk's lesson again. 100 small boats made a harbor where none existed. We shift, she said. Washington, shove the madrigals. Fremont will absorb what bounces. They moved, the band surged and stumbled. The lance brightened, a cruel line threading toward the painted container. Too late, Ortega said quietly. Something thin and silver knifed across the lance's path and held. A preterite needle ship slid into the beam, neutrality burning off like fog. Annex 3 enforcement, its captain said on wideband, deadpan as a bailiff. We stand with hazard mitigation. Their knife hull glowed. The temple's paint did not burn. The choir's note went a fraction flatter, rage or shock or both. Park pressed her lips together hard enough to hurt. Reset the seam. Thank you, Observer. Please make my paperwork worth it, the Observer replied and cut the channel as alarms screamed in 6 languages again. The sub-cathedral reacted like a conductor whose soloist just went jazz in a symphony hall. It threw a chord that throbbed in bone and weld, and the madrigals charged, nimble as gilt. Washington slammed one with a vesper, tuned for shove rather than puncture. The shard skittered into its neighbor, and the pair caromed like billiard balls across the lantern light. Yorktown groaned but held the near bookend, her captain muttering scripture and hull temperature in the same breath. Observer 2 is venting, Reynolds reported, voice tight. The needle ship that had taken the lance was bleeding plasma into the corridor, making a pink aurora that did nothing to help and everything to terrify. They're still on vector. Send them our coolant profiles, Park said, because a bureaucracy that chose to bleed could also be helped. They can trim the vent into our rhythm. Copy, they comply, Reynolds said, a smile cracking through shock. They'll file the form later. Rel's clicks sharpened. Captain Park, the madrigals learned our backbeat. They anticipate the 4th measure. We must swing harder. Reynolds, make it messy, Park said. Oakland corner Friday night. Let the drummer lead and the choir follow. The band loosened, moved from a tidy 12-bar to something with a hitch in it, a human stutter on purpose. The lanterns along the Candleline pulsed warm, then warmer, a living artery. The slipgate mouth yawned ahead like an answer. Get there and the convoy could fall through its throat toward a system with hospitals and lawyers and a chance to sleep. But the choir flowed to block, their cathedrals angling to bracket the lane and turn it into a cage. We're out of nice options, Ortega said. 2 Vespers left, the ones the Admiral told us to save. We can use them to paint the gate's rim, widen the throat for a mass dump, or we can crack the sub-cathedral's kneecap and hope it buys us space. Just war says proportionality, Park murmured. Gates are public works, we don't wreck them. Washington's captain cut in, voice rough. I can tip the sub-cathedral if you widen the throat, give me a beat to dance on. Park nodded once. We paint the gate. Washington, you get your dance. Old salt to Fremont, Nguyen said, smoke in her tone and humor in the ash. Second glitter bay's almost dry. I've got a third trick. We never told you because you call me reckless when I'm right. I can flare the whole lane like a lantern, blind the choir just long enough for the mass to drop. Burn timing on that is murderous, Ortega said. Whoever lights it from inside the seam eats the echo. Let me be the candle, Nguyen said softly. You stole my idea earlier. Loan it back to me now. Park tasted salt that wasn't sweat. We can set a remote. Remote won't ride the harmonics, Nguyen said, patient the way elders are when a younger officer hasn't yet learned that loss is part of the craft. It has to hear us breathing. Don't cheat me of my choice, Captain. Rel clicked a chord that meant witness. Reynolds went very still, then looked at Park. If Old Salt lights it, we can place the Vespers on the gate rim with perfect timing. The throat will open wide enough to push a city through. Yorktown will not survive a second curtain call, Ortega warned. She's held too much already. Yorktown, Park said, hold until your teeth break and then show me the pieces. She toggled to Old Salt. Nguyen, if you do this, you take my voice with you. Nguyen laughed like foghorns and coffee. I was planning to steal it anyway. The lane narrowed, brightened, shimmered. The choir tightened. The convoy reached for the gate, engines begging, instruments singing, human wrongness turned right. Park lifted a hand she couldn't feel and gave the order that would shape the rest of her life. Light the lantern, paint the rim, Washington, dance. It began with a hush that wasn't quiet. The band took a breath, the long inhale before a choir's final chord, and Old Salt slid into the seam like a hand slipping into a glove worn smooth by generations. Nguyen's tug was small compared to a cathedral, small compared to Fremont, but it found the center of the beat as if it had been practicing in secret. Glitter canisters unfurled, not as chaff, but as a braided halo of foil and wire tuned to the Candleline's pulse. Vespers away, Ortega said, and the last 2 missiles curved like careful brushstrokes to kiss the slipgate rim. They didn't gouge, they painted. A standing wave that teased the throat wider made room for all the wrong shapes of a refugee fleet. Washington, shove, Park said, and the heavy tug danced. Its vector wasn't pretty, it was effective. The sub-cathedral reached, misread the beat, and Washington's Vesper tapped its arch just off balance. The giant stumbled, a mountain with its shoelaces tied together long enough for the lane to flex around it. Lantern at peak in 5. Reynolds called, counting like a metronome trusted by an orchestra on fire. 4, 3, 2. Nguyen keyed her mic, and every speaker on every ship carried her voice like a hymn through 1,000 cheap cones. Nobody gets left, she said, and lit the 3rd bay. The flare bloomed like sunrise. Not a weapon, no edges, no spear points, a bowl of light. The oscillators sang the band's sloppy gospel, amplified by Virinti's drumskin until the choir's perfect crystals couldn't find themselves in the mirror. Madrigals bit and lost teeth. The sub-cathedral's lance curled into its own vent and came out as an embarrassed hiss. The preterite needle ships flared legal lights that looked suspiciously like celebration. Drop, Park shouted. All ships, drop. The convoy fell into the slipgate throat in a staggered grace, barges and tugs and the painted temple going last but not least. Yorktown sagged as she crossed the rim, then stumbled through and vanished. Washington's hull glowed dull cherry and followed. Virinti clicked a goodbye that translated inadequately, as family found and slipped after them. Old Salt remained, a candle behind the choir screen keeping the bowl bright. Nguyen's last transmission was a recipe for gumbo spat out in a laugh as if to remind them that war is not the only craft handed down. Then the flare ate the channel. The tug's squawk code blinked to zeros. The light curled inward like a petal after rain, and the choir's rage arrived a second too late to take anything but pride. Fremont held 6 until her struts sang and her bones remembered every storm at sea her name carried. Then Park turned her, a slow roll that shed heat and guilt in equal measure, and dove for the gate. The preterite needles slid into her wake like citations tucked into a pocket and did not object. They fell through. On the far side, space opened like a hand unclenching. Hospital ships flared reception lights. 1,000 listeners asked at once who had lived and who had not. The band, now barely a hum, slowed to a rest. Park unbuckled and felt decades older. "Convoy check," she said. Voices answered. Becky E. cracked mural intact. The temple paint unburned, a child crying because the danger was over and because sometimes that is when you finally can. Yorktown limping but afloat. Washington proud and ugly. Virinti singing a Cathari lullaby into the channel and pretending it was for the children. Reynolds swallowed hard. Old Salt does not answer. Park closed her eyes, then opened them because leaders don't lead in the dark. "Log her as Lantern Prime," she said, voice rough. "Name the corridor she bought with her bones. Candleline is now doctrine. Civilian hazard mitigation by harmonic detuning, coalition-operated, preterite observed." The needle ships pinged a formal acknowledgement, followed by something less formal. Annex revisions forthcoming. Recipe attached. Cathari tea for radiation nausea. We propose a joint symposium on music has navigation. Rel's clicks in reply were loving and exasperated at once. "Humans make rules to hold your kindness in place," they said on a private line. "You are very loud creatures. It is good to put your ethics in lights." Park watched the Becky E. crew repaint their mural in real time, adding a silver needle ship and a beetle-shaped Cathari corvette holding hands with stick figures under a brighter sun. She thought of Midway and Dunkirk and code talkers and bus boycotts, and how victories are a braid of planning and luck and people choosing each other. She thought of a gumbo recipe delivered into a battle like a benediction. "Candleline protocol," she said to the recorder. "Final note, bravery is a habit, not an event. Teach the habit, rehearse it until it sings." In the quiet that followed, the fleet began to hum again, not a dirge, not a march, but the work song of a people who leave no one behind. Somewhere, she hoped, the choir would hear it and learn something about mercy that math alone refuses to teach.